My father didn't just miss a party or a graduation ceremony. He didn't come to my wedding. The one day I called him more than once. The day I stood at the end of the aisle, my hands trembling slightly from gripping the bouquet too tightly. And in the front row, my father's seat was empty. No congratulations, no apology, just silence, the kind of silence that lasts long enough for you to learn how to pretend you no longer need anything. I told myself I'm fine. From now on, I won't wait for anything anymore. Then everything shifted. That morning, my name appeared on the business news. The resort chain I had built was valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. My phone vibrated. The message I had waited years for finally arrived. Family dinner, 7 p.m., important discussion. No congratulations, no mention of my name, just an order. Funny, really. He didn't come to his daughter's wedding, but I went to that dinner, carrying something he had never prepared himself to face. People think broken families are loud. Mine wasn't. It was quiet, terrifyingly so, and it was in that silence that everything began to change. Before I tell you what happened at that dinner, tell me where you're watching this story from, and at what time. I read every single comment, just to know that in this moment, I'm not telling this story alone. Now, come back with me to the house where silence was never peace, but a sign of something that had been quietly rotting for a very long time, and was about to collapse. People think broken families are loud, but in my house, silence was the thing that caused the deepest damage. Our home in Charleston was always spotless to the point of feeling cold. The wooden floors were wiped every morning, curtains perfectly aligned. Not a single object out of place. There were no arguments here, no doors slammed shut, only long pauses stretching between sentences. Dinner was served on time. Everyone sat in their usual seats. No one asked how my day had been. No one needed to know what I had gone through. That quiet wasn't peace. It felt like an unspoken rule: don't disturb, don't ask, don't expect to be noticed. William Monroe never had to raise his voice. He only needed to step into the room and everything automatically slowed down. My father always wore a suit, even at home. Tie perfectly straight, watch polished and gleaming. He spoke little, but every sentence carried weight. When I was younger, I thought it was authority. Growing up, I realized it was distance. My father didn't ask questions. He evaluated, a nod instead of praise, a passing glance instead of presence. In my house, my father's silence was the true measure of power. My mother, Dorothy Monroe, always spoke softly. Her voice was gentle enough that no one ever argued back. Your father is under a lot of pressure. You should try to understand him. Our family is doing just fine. Those sentences were repeated for years. They didn't hurt me immediately. They made me question whether I was being too sensitive. My mother didn't deny my pain. She just made it irrelevant. And so, I learned to be silent with them. Caleb, my older brother, always knew exactly where he stood. In the safest position. Every one of his achievements was mentioned at the dinner table. Every mistake was quickly brushed aside. Caleb didn't have to try to be seen. He only had to exist in the right place. I used to think it was luck. Later, I understood it was a system, and I was never part of it. When my father's message appeared that evening, I didn't feel surprised. I only felt clarity. He hadn't disappeared because he was busy. He only appeared when I became useful. And if the reason he called me home wasn't because of family, then I wondered this time, what did he need from me? I wasn't abandoned in a single day. I was placed behind for many years. I remember clearly the first time I understood my position in the Monroe household, not through words, but through the way everything unfolded. Naturally. It was a parent-teacher meeting day at school. I brought home a certificate of achievement, the edges of the paper still warm from the printer. My father glanced at it, gave a single nod, then set it down on the table. No follow-up, no looking up. A few minutes later, Caleb ran in, bragging about a goal he had scored in last night's game. My father stood up, patted his shoulder, asked for every detail. I sat there, my certificate lying between two half-finished glasses of water. No one told me to be quiet, but I understood when it was my turn. The conversation was already over. Dinner in our house always had an order. My father at the head of the table, my mother to his right, Caleb across from him, me in the remaining seat. No one gave instructions. We just knew our places. When Caleb talked about his future, my father nodded as if he had expected it all along. When I spoke about my dreams, my mother smiled politely, the smile she used for guests. "You should choose something more stable," she said, soft as air. My father didn't object. He didn't need to. I learned to listen more than I spoke, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to be the one who slowed dinner down. No one ever sat us down to lay out the rules, but everyone followed them. Don't demand. Don't disturb. Don't expect to be prioritized. In this house, attention was a resource, and it was always allocated to the one deemed deserving. I began to make myself smaller, stepping more lightly on the stairs, speaking more quietly in the living room. I thought that was maturity. Only later did I understand it was how I survived in a system that wasn't designed for me. There came a day when I no longer hoped to be seen. I only hoped not to be noticed. The ceremony that day took place in a small auditorium, wooden chairs lined up in neat rows. My name was called. A few polite rounds of applause. I looked toward the familiar seats and didn't see my father. I didn't check my phone, didn't ask anyone to call him, didn't explain anything to the teachers. I stood on the stage, accepted the certificate, and smiled appropriately. A smile that had been practiced. As I stepped down, I knew I had left behind an old habit, the habit of waiting for someone who was never coming. From that day on, I stopped telling my father about the important things, not out of anger, but because I understood the rules. My mother stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, the familiar scent filling the room. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "Your father didn't mean it. He really is busy. You know he loves you in his own way." Every sentence was gentle, so gentle that if I argued back, I would become the difficult one. My mother didn't deny my father's absence. She simply made it reasonable. And just like that, the fault no longer rested with them. It shifted to me for wanting more than I was allowed. That night, I understood something. Gentleness, too, can be a way of preserving order. In my bedroom, I closed the door so softly the hinges didn't make a sound. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the small trophy on the shelf. A thin layer of dust settled on it. I didn't put it away. I didn't bring it out to show anyone. I just left it there, as proof to myself. From that day on, I became more agreeable, asked less, needed less, appeared less. They called it maturity. I called it survival. And it was precisely because I learned to stay silent for long enough that they believed I would never step out of my place. They thought I had grown used to standing behind. And that belief is what left them unprepared for the day I stood up. I used to think that if I was good enough, they would come back. But there are people who only return when you become useful enough. The night after the wedding, the hotel room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioner breathing steadily. The dress hung from its hanger, heavy with its own weight. The bouquet sat in a glass of water, the petals already beginning to droop. I sat on the edge of the bed, removing each pin from my hair. Each one fell with a soft sound, small on its own, but together long enough to think. I remembered standing at the end of the aisle. I remembered the front row. I remembered the empty space where no one called my name. There was no sobbing, just a slow spreading emptiness, like water seeping through fabric. I asked myself what I had been hoping for from someone who had never promised to stay. And that question exhausted me more than the sadness itself. Daniel stood out on the balcony, both hands resting on the railing. The wind carried the salty scent of the river, the sound of cars fading below. He handed me a glass of water. He didn't ask. He didn't rush. "I'm not okay," I said. My voice sounded strange, as if I were speaking on behalf of someone else. Daniel nodded. He didn't step closer right away. He gave me enough space to continue, or to stop. I told him about the empty chair, about the message that contained only a single line, about the feeling that I had done everything right and still been wrong. Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't soften the story. "Have you noticed?" he said slowly. "You always tell your story as if you need permission to be sad." That sentence stopped me cold. "Since when did you have to prove that your pain is reasonable?" he asked, not harshly, just truthfully. I looked down at my hands resting on the cold railing. For the first time that day, I didn't have to explain why I felt this way. "You're not wrong for wanting to be loved," Daniel said. "But you don't have to keep paying a price to prove that you're worthy." I closed my eyes, and this time, I exhaled completely. After Daniel had fallen asleep, I lay staring at the ceiling. Streetlight spilled in from outside, dividing the room into uneven patches of light and shadow. The familiar questions returned, like a reflex. What if I were better? What if I needed less attention? What if I were more like Caleb? Then what I had asked those questions for years, not to blame anyone, but to find a reason that would make everything hurt less. I remembered the chair in the living room of our old house. It was always Caleb's seat. As for me, I could sit anywhere. No one pushed me away, but no one pulled me back either. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became those questions never led to answers. They always led me back to the same point: I was the one who had to change. I looked at my hands, the small calluses, the faint lines. Maybe the problem wasn't that I wasn't enough. Maybe it was that I had placed my worth in the wrong hands for far too long. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, thin and gentle. The city was beginning to wake up. I wasn't in a hurry. I stood in front of the mirror. I didn't adjust much. I just looked straight ahead. If my father didn't come to my wedding, then he wouldn't come to any place that didn't benefit him. That thought didn't hurt me. It clarified things. I didn't need one more attempt to be seen. I didn't need one more explanation for someone else's absence. I decided to stop waiting. Stop hoping they would change. Stop living in the gap between being chosen and being overlooked. And it was in that quiet decision that I began to step out of the role my family had assigned to me. He stayed silent for many years. Then one morning, he sent exactly one line. The morning at the office began like any other day. Sunlight cut across the glass windows. The computer screen lit up with a packed meeting schedule. My phone vibrated. A message. The sender's name made me pause. William. Just one line. No greeting. No question mark. Family dinner. 7 p.m. Tonight. There's something we need to discuss. I stared at the screen long enough for my coffee to go cold. 3 years. 3 years of silence followed by an order. No congratulations for last week's deal. No how have you been. Just a time. A place. And the expectation that I would show up. I locked the screen. And for the first time, my heart didn't ache. There was only a cold clarity. Daniel was washing his hands in the kitchen when I set my phone down on the table. He glanced at it, then at me. Your father, I nodded. He didn't ask anything else. Just dried his hands slowly, as if arranging his thoughts. He didn't message when your company hit 10 million, Daniel said. Not 50, not 200. He looked up, but now, the sentence hung in the kitchen. I understood what he wasn't saying. What do you think he wants? I asked. Daniel shrugged. Barely. I think he's missing something. It wasn't an accusation, just a simple calculation, and a frightening one. The desk phone rang. Lena. Her voice went straight to the point. Savannah. Where are you? At the office. Do you have a few minutes? I closed the glass door. The air in the room suddenly felt heavier. One of the Monroe family's lenders just reached out. Lena said slowly. There are some accounts that aren't right. I stood still, not surprised, just listening. They're behind on payments. Several months. Lena paused. And they're trying to offload the risk. I looked out the window. The city was moving as usual. Lena, I said calmly, send me everything you have. The call ended. And in that moment, I knew that dinner wasn't an apology. If you're still listening to this story, comment the number 1 below, so I know you're staying with me through it. Lena sent the first email. The subject line had only 4 words, and I knew I was about to see what they had hidden for far too long. Some invitations aren't meant to reconcile. They're sent when someone is about to lose control. Lena was waiting for me in the driveway, a thick folder clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't bother with greetings. She just opened the car door. You should see this before you decide, Lena said. On the passenger seat, spreadsheets filled the pages, more red columns than green. Loans nearing maturity, contracts on hold, unpaid contractors. I flipped through page after page. My heartbeat strangely steady. No shock, just the pieces finally aligning. How long, I asked. At least 6 months. Lena replied. And it's getting worse. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The road ahead was long and straight, so the message had a reason. Back in my office, I closed the door and sat down. Outside, the city continued calmly as if nothing were about to collapse. I replayed every milestone. 10 million silence, 50 silence, 200 still silence. Then suddenly family dinner. Not when I needed him, but when he needed me. That thought didn't make me angry. It made me alert. I was used to being overlooked, but I had never been invited back for this reason. That wasn't regret. That was calculation. And I had just been pulled onto the chessboard late, but at exactly the right moment. Daniel stood by the door as I put on my coat. He looked at me without asking where I was going. I'm going, I said, not to reassure him, but to confirm it to myself. I know, Daniel replied. But you go on your terms. I nodded. I didn't bring documents. I didn't bring promises. I brought only the truth they didn't know I already held. I wasn't going to save him. I wasn't going to be acknowledged. I was going to face the man who had been silent toward me my entire life and see what he would ask for when power was no longer on his side. They thought that dinner was their last chance, but they didn't know. I had already bought the right to decide before I walked out the door. I arrived exactly on time, not because I was summoned, but because I had already taken control before that moment. The private dining room of the country club was filled with warm yellow light, too warm for a conversation that was about to turn cold. William sat at the head of the table, back straight, suit perfectly tailored, Dorothy to his right, her hand resting on an untouched glass of wine. Caleb leaned back in his chair, wearing the familiar look, the confidence of someone who still believed he was at the center. I walked in, unhurried, unapologetic. Daniel pulled out a chair for me. The sound of the chair legs scraping the floor rang louder than necessary. William glanced at his watch. "You're late." I set my bag down. "No," I said evenly. "I'm right on time." No one argued. The silence stretched long enough for everyone to sense that something had shifted. I didn't study the room. I studied them. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. No one here was truly comfortable. William cleared his throat. "We're all busy. Let's get straight to the point," he said smoothly, as if I had always belonged inside this circle. "The family," he continued, "is going through a difficult period." Dorothy nodded faintly. Caleb stared down at the table. No one looked at me. "You're doing very well," William went on. It was the first compliment I had heard from him in years. There was no emotion in his voice, just a fact delivered at a convenient moment. "With your current position," he said, "you could help the family get through this. Help, not share, not apologize." I placed both hands on the table. Slowly. "You mean money?" No one answered right away. But that silence said everything. He called it family. I knew he was talking about money, and that was the moment I decided I would not let him steer this conversation for another minute. No one asked if I was okay. They only asked what I could provide. Dorothy was the one who broke the silence. Her voice was soft, familiar, the kind used to make everything sound reasonable. "Savannah," she said, "we're all family. In hard times, we have to lean on each other." Caleb cleared his throat. "It's only temporary," he said quickly. "A bridge loan. Once the market recovers." William raised his hand to stop him. He preferred to deliver the conclusion himself. "I'm not asking you to do anything unreasonable," he said. "Just stand as a guarantor, or inject some capital to keep things stable." Keep stable. Words that sounded gentle. I looked at each of them in turn. No one mentioned the wedding. No one said I'm sorry. No one asked how I had lived during the years they were absent. "So," I said slowly, "this dinner is about money." Dorothy pressed her lips together. Caleb avoided my eyes. William didn't deny it. He only said, "Family shouldn't keep score." I nodded. "True," I said. "But risk does." William leaned back in his chair. "You're doing very well," he repeated. "With your resources, 87 million. I cut in. The sound of cutlery stopped. The wine glass in Caleb's hand froze midair. William narrowed his eyes. "What did you say?" "Total short-term obligations," I replied. "Not including the pending penalties." Dorothy went still. "How did you get that number?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence work for me. "You thought I came here to hear an offer," I said, "but I came to set conditions." William placed his hand flat on the table. His voice dropped. "You're crossing a line." I met his gaze. "The line has moved." I stood up and slid my chair back. "I will not sign as a guarantor. I will not inject unconditional funds." I picked up my bag. "And if you want to continue this conversation, we'll do it my way." William called me here to ask for help. But he didn't know. I had already brought the authority with me, and this dinner was only just beginning. I didn't need my father to sign anything, because on paper, I was already standing on the other side. I stepped out of the private room and closed the door. Not locked. No need. I called Lena. She answered immediately, as if she had been waiting. "Go ahead," I said. Lena's voice was calm. "The debt portfolio has been transferred. All of it, discounted according to the correct risk framework." I looked at my reflection in the wall mirror. My face was strangely composed. "Effective timing?" I asked. "As soon as the lender signed?" 2 hours ago." I nodded. even though she couldn't see me. Send confirmation to legal. The call ended. I stood still for a few seconds, listening to my own breathing. There was no feeling of victory, only absolute clarity. I returned to the dining room. When I sat down, no one spoke. The spoon in Dorothy's hand tapped lightly against her plate, a small sound, but loud enough in the silence. Caleb stood up on instinct, then stopped, as if realizing there was no longer a place for him at the center of this story. The table was still perfectly set. The wine glasses remained untouched, but the power had changed hands. William looked up as I sat down. He waited for me to speak. "You don't need me to guarantee anything," I said, "because the current creditor is me." Dorothy gasped sharply. Caleb sprang up, then sat back down, unsure what to do with his body. William let out a thin smile. "You're joking." I placed my phone on the table. The confirmation email was clearly visible. "I didn't come to save you," I said. "I came to end this properly. By the book." William's voice turned low. "You call this family," I looked straight at him. "You call it privilege. I call it risk." I stood and slid my chair back. "Within 30 days, the assets will be restructured. My team will be in touch." William's phone vibrated on the table. A new email. The subject line was brief and cold: "Legal notice, change of creditor." He didn't open it. He didn't need to. I picked up my bag. "We'll talk again, when you're ready to tell the truth." My father called it betrayal. I called it the end of a privilege. When the truth came to light, no one asked who was right. They asked, who would take responsibility? The next morning, the office felt brighter than usual. Not because of sunlight, but because of screens. My company's name scrolled across the financial news. Short lines, clean, emotionless, change of creditor, portfolio restructuring. Lena stood beside my desk and set her tablet down. "Initial reactions are stable," she said. "The market likes clarity." I nodded. My phone kept vibrating, but I didn't rush to answer. Emails from partners, messages from lawyers, a missed call from an unknown number. Everyone wanted to know who now held the power. No one asked why. I walked to the window. Charleston in the morning was so quiet it felt almost disconnected from the numbers changing hands out there. "The media will ask about motive," Lena said. "Let them ask," I replied. "We answer with process. No victory statements, no moral declarations. Justice, when it functions properly, doesn't need a loud voice." At the old house, lunch passed in silence. William sat at his desk, his shirt still unpressed. His phone lay face down. There was no need to check the news anymore. Dorothy moved back and forth between the kitchen and the living room, holding a cup of cold tea. She said a few words, then stopped. There was no one left to nod and carry the conversation forward. Caleb read online comments, line by line. The family name appeared in a way he had never known. Not praise, not reverence. "We should call Savannah," Dorothy said quietly. William didn't respond. He stared at the empty space in front of him where every plan had once included an exit. Now, the exit had conditions, and those conditions were no longer in his hands. Caleb set his phone down. "She won't save us," he said. Not bitter, just tired. No one argued, because for the first time, the entire house understood one thing. This silence wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a consequence. That evening, I came home early. Daniel was in the kitchen, warm yellow light overhead, no barrage of questions. Just a look that told him I'd been through a long day. "You okay?" he asked. "Good," I said. In the right way, we sat down, without turning on the news. Out there, people were debating. In here, I only heard the wall clock ticking. My phone vibrated. A message from my mother. No apology, No request, just 3 dots, and then silence. I set the phone down. I didn't reply. Boundaries don't need to be explained every time. They exist because they were crossed too many times before. Daniel placed his hand over mine. "Proud of you," he said. I exhaled, not in relief, but in steadiness. Everything had collapsed but inside me. There was no sense of victory, only a pause, quiet enough to step into peace. There are victories that don't need an audience. They only need you. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. No meeting schedule, no flood of notifications, just pale light filtering through the curtains, touching the cold wooden floor. I brewed coffee and stood still for a few minutes, letting the aroma spread. In the past, mornings like this were rare. I was always rushing as if stopping meant everything would collapse. I opened my laptop, but not to work, just to look back at a few old notes. Goals I had once written down to earn recognition, plans that carried a quiet fear of being abandoned. I remembered old dinners, when I spoke less so I wouldn't be a burden. I remembered learning to read my father's mood from the sound of doors closing. I used to think that if I were good enough, obedient enough, quiet enough, one day he would stay. Now I understand that was not my failure. I didn't delete those notes. I simply closed them, not because they were wrong, but because I had moved far beyond the place where they were born. Daniel walked into the kitchen, his shirt still creased. He looked at me and smiled softly. "Sleep well." "Good," I said. "Very good." We ate breakfast in silence. Not avoidance, but the rare comfort of not needing to fill the space. My phone vibrated. A short message from my mother. No apology, no request. Just "Mom hopes you're okay." I read it. Didn't reply right away. Daniel didn't ask. He understood that some boundaries don't need verbal explanations. They exist because they are held, not because they are approved. I set the phone down, returned to my cooling breakfast, and felt enough. That afternoon, I walked along the harbor. A light breeze, rippling water, small details I used to overlook. I stopped and looked at my reflection on the surface. No longer tense, no longer rehearsing answers to questions no one was asking. I thought about my family, not with hope that they would change, just with acceptance of the truth. Some relationships only function when you are always giving, and when you stop, they reveal their true shape. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly. My shoulders relaxed without effort, my jaw unclenched. For the first time in a very long while, my body was not in a defensive posture, not waiting for a belated word, not bracing for a familiar disappearance. For the first time, I didn't call it a victory. I called it being exactly where I belonged. Maybe this story isn't about me. Maybe it's about the moment you realize you've been silent for far too long. Maybe somewhere in what you've just heard, you paused. Not because of drama, but because of something familiar. The time you stayed quiet to keep the peace. The time you nodded even though you were already exhausted inside. The time you told yourself, "It's okay," and then repeated that sentence for years. Not everyone has a major event that forces them to stop. Sometimes, it's just a quieter than usual evening. A message you no longer feel the need to reply to. A small decision, but for the first time, it's for you. If you've ever been the one who is always fine, the one who can handle it, the one who is told you can wait, know this: you are not weak. You've simply been carrying too much. As this story comes to a close, I don't think about who was wrong. I think about what was right. Fairness isn't being loved more. Fairness is being respected equally and having the right to say no without paying for it with silence or guilt. Some families change because they want to. Some families only change when one person stops carrying the weight for everyone else. You don't need to fix them. You only need to fix the boundaries. And when boundaries stand firm, everything around them is forced to rearrange. If this story resonated with you, let me know where are you watching from, and at what time. Early morning, lunch break, or late at night. Every answer is a shared breath. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can tell you more meaningful and valuable stories about life. See you in the next story.